PharmaVentures, experts in deals and alliances.
Hello and welcome to PharmaVentures Insights here at On Helix 2017 in Cambridge. The quest for new cures and better ways of diagnosing cancer goes on and on, with more and more expensive treatments hoping to make it to market. However, not all of these are available to all patients, and it would be a better world if we could deliver better diagnosis and treatment for those patients and for all patients. Joining me on the show today is Eric Mays of Endomag, and he's going to tell us a little bit about what his company is doing to address that need. Eric, welcome.
Thank you for having me.
So Endomag, perhaps we could start, you could tell us a little bit about Endomag and what you're doing.
Okay, so Endomag is a medical device company involved in surgical guidance, and so what that means is we help surgeons find the tissue that they're interested in finding, primarily in oncology. It means finding the primary tumor, it means finding lymph nodes that might be implicated in the spread of cancer. So you might say, well, don't surgeons know how to find that already? And maybe the best way to put it is we're at the confluence of three trends in medicine. One being, as you highlighted, overall economic benefit, healthcare outcomes. And we do improve efficiency, but the other two are more specific to the technology. One is diagnostics is getting better, so screening programs have been implemented that in the case of breast cancer, we're now having a 78% 10-year survival rate. There are a number of other cancers that don't have the diagnostics in place now, and that's why you see interest in liquid biopsy, breath biopsy, enthusiasm around that space. But a consequence of finding tumors early is that they find them when they're quite small. And that's great because you can treat them, but when it comes to surgery, the surgeon's problem is they have difficulty finding them. So the radiologist can see something, but the surgeon can't find it. And so there are ways of doing that, but they're quite crude, and that's partly where we come in. And then the final trend is one of minimally invasive surgery. So trying not only to minimize the size of an incision, so this is where robotics has come in as a trend, but also trying to minimize the amount of tissue that you take out so that you get better patient outcomes, better cosmesis. And one of the techniques that's used, particularly in breast cancer, is to take out some lymph nodes that would be implicated in the spread of cancer. And in the past, they'd take out lots of lymph nodes, all of the lymph nodes in, say, the armpit region. And in 2010, the standard of care turned into something where if they inject a radioisotope, that isotope would flow to a couple of lymph nodes, and if they took those out, they had the same predictive value, but minimized the amount of tissue they take. But in that case, in the case of finding the primary lesion, the methodologies that people use aren't available everywhere and aren't as good for patient outcomes, and that's where Endomag comes in. So
is your proposition, is it better, less expensive, as good? What's the benefit?
I'd love to say all of those and more. There are multiple benefits. So we have an underlying platform that's kind of like a metal detector. So the surgeon waves this over the body and they get a beep when they're next to the thing they're looking for. And then we have two things that get implanted into the patient. One, something called MagSeed, which is about the size of a grain of rice, and that gets placed by the radiologist at the site of the primary tumor. And then the surgeon uses that to find the tumor, so they can basically have the guidance. What that's replacing is, in the case of breast cancer, they will implant a wire that protrudes from the breast that has a tiny fishhook at the end. So it's quite barbaric. They implant that, tell the patient don't move, and then they send them off to surgery. And one of the consequences of having that protruding is that it can move. And what they find is between 20 and 40% of the patients have to come back for a follow-up surgery because that wire has moved and the surgeon has missed the primary tumor or missed an edge of that tumor. So with our product MagSeed, it can be implanted up to 30 days in advance. It stays where it's put. Patient's happier, the surgeon's happier. The interaction between radiology and surgery gets freed up in terms of workflow. So it saves the hospital money. It saves the patient a lot of aggravation and concern over having a wire placed. And most importantly, it reduces the number of re-excision surgeries that happen, so it saves cost.
So there's clearly an economic benefit there. Is there a patient benefit? Do you get a better outcome for the patient by using your technology?
Yes, I mean there's one element is if the wire moves, that they tend to take out larger amounts of tissue just to counteract the fact that it may have moved. by having something that stays with the tissue, you minimize the amount of tissue you take out, and particularly in something like breast cancer where patients, the outcome, the cosmetic outcome is very important. They want to minimize that amount of tissue, and that's something that our mag seed provides. But there's, I talked about also the lymph node aspect. So in the case of cancer, breast cancer in particular, any solid tumor that might spread, first clinicians want to assess the tumor. How big is it? What are its molecular profiles? What drugs can we use against it? But they also want to know, has that tumor spread in the body? Are there distant metastases? And if there are, then to get there, it would have to go through the lymphatic system first. And so the first place people look for the spread of cancer is in these lymph nodes. Whereas in the past, they take out all of them. I talked about this technique in 2010 that became standard of care of finding the sentinel nodes, the ones that would be the first to receive spread. The issue with that is that people use a radioisotope that has a 6-hour half-life. And so, again, nuclear medicine needs to be scheduled very quickly against surgery so the patients don't time out. So there's a workflow issue. Or if you're at a tiny hospital in the middle of nowhere, you have to get referred to London or Cambridge, a site that has nuclear medicine. In our case, we use a magnetic particle that flows exactly in the same way as the radioisotope, but rather than a 6-hour half-life, we have a 3-year shelf life. We can also inject that many days in advance. We can also inject it just prior to the surgery once the patient has had anesthesia, which is something they don't have. So from a patient perspective, they're saying this is great. We no longer have to endure the painful stick because we're already under. We have the same outcomes as what happens with the standard of care, but we do it in a way that gives a lot more flexibility to hospitals, saving cost, and really the probably big demand is with surgeons. It puts them in charge. They no longer have to have their schedule set by radiology or nuclear medicine. They get to choose when they do the surgery alongside the patient.
So there's a lot of benefits all along the various stakeholders in the process. You talked a lot about breast cancer.
Yes.
Presumably it's applicable to other types of cancer as well?
It is. So we started in breast cancer partly because breast cancer is a pretty significant indication in 1.7 million women globally, and it's surprisingly, despite advances in screening and drugs, it's continuing to grow, and they expect that by 2030 the incidence of breast cancer will have doubled from that. That said, these two products, the one for finding lymph nodes and the one for finding the primary lesion, are applicable to other cancers. Breast cancer is where this technique has become standard of care. Other cancers, such as prostate cancer, head and neck cancer, endometrial cancer, are ones that surgeons are using now, but they haven't really been established as standard of care. So one of the things we're doing is investing in trials to demonstrate that finding the sentinel node has the same value as it does in breast cancer. But yeah, we're active in probably 10 additional indications. Right,
so let's talk a little bit about the stage of the company and where you are in your growth. And
yes.
So you're already being used in breast cancer out in the field now.
Yes.
So that product's on the market, is that correct?
So we have, so the two products are on the market in Europe. One product, the lesion localizer, is on the market in the US. It's launched there last year. The lymph node product we expect to have approved later this year by the FDA. We're active in 30 countries, and we have been active in the market since 2012. The US is the most recent market that we have. We've treated over 20,000 patients to date, and that number is continuing to grow pretty rapidly, again, because of sort of pushing on an open door when you can make surgeons, patients, hospitals' lives and cost economics much more attractive.
Sure, and from a competition point of view, is there any competition for what you're doing other than the old school methodology?
There is for the lesion localizer. So in a way, that's probably the more, not that finding lymph nodes isn't a compelling product, but finding that primary lesion, these wires that I told you about, that's technology that goes back to 1970, and surgeons hate them. Patients hate them, radiologists hate them. And whereas the case with the lymph node product, people only in 2010 did that become the standard of care. So people have a way of dealing with that right now. We alleviate some of their issues, but with the other one, this is something they've been having to endure since 1970, and so that's really a big open door for us. But it also means that there are a lot of competitors that have appeared. We're the only one that can do both that and find the lymph node, though, and so that's one of our compelling features for surgeons is that they only invest in one piece of capital, and we can do all the things they've been doing before, rather than buying one piece of capital just to find the primary lesion and having a secondary piece of capital to find the lymph nodes during surgery.
Right, so there's an instrument they have to invest in, and there's their consumables as well.
Correct.
Is that the business model? You sell them an instrument
Absolutely.
and you sell the consumables
Yeah,
for
it's the razor blade.
Yep.
But despite being that, we don't want to be the HP of inks and rip people off. What we've realized is that there's so many inefficiencies in the market that just solving those efficiency problems has enough value for us to charge a reasonable amount for the consumable that we can make a good business, but also save a lot for the hospitals.
So it's a win-win, as they say.
It is a win-win.
And what of the future for the business? What's on the horizon? Do you expect to be acquired, IPO? What are you looking to do?
Well, it's certainly unusual for a medical device company to get too far without being acquired by a major. You see, one of the sort of big brothers that we look to as an example, there's a company called Novadac, a Canadian company that was acquired by Stryker last month for about $700 million. And they have a system, an imaging system to look at vascularization. We see ourselves as a sort of earlier stage version of Novadac, and so but they had listed on the Toronto Exchange, and they went to NASDAQ, and ultimately they were acquired. I imagine that would be a similar pathway that we would follow. And so, we're preparing for growth. I mean, we've been growing pretty dramatically over the last couple of years. Now we're investing in a lot more of these new indications. Basically what you'll see is a lot more clinical work by us to extend what we're doing into these new indications, but alongside that, a lot of these new indications tend to be things where a laparoscopic or robotic procedure would be done. And so we've been taking our little metal detector that kind of looks like a bread box with a little wand, and turning that into something that is more appropriate for doing a robotic surgery. So a much smaller probe that could be grasped by something like a Da Vinci robot and moved around the body internally to find lymph nodes or the primary lesion.
Well, Eric, it sounds like you're bringing an innovative solution to an old problem, but helping both patients and physicians and the economics of the situation as well. And we'll look forward to hearing more about you in the future.
Great, thank you very much.
Thanks for joining us.
Absolutely.
For more information about PharmaVentures, visit our website